Hello Grand Archive players, let's answer a rules question. How can you tell what kind of things you have to declare when activating something and what you have to declare later upon resolution? This is a bit of a nebulous question, but being able to identify these sorts of things is important to understanding when you have to make certain decisions, when players are able to respond to effects, what information they would have when they do so, how to sequence those effects, and so forth. Let me show you what I mean by diving in immediately with an illustrative example. You activate Cremation Ritual, intending to sacrifice a Caretaker drone with class bonus. Do you draw 2 cards first, or do you glimpse first? Answer: you will glimpse 4 before drawing 2 cards. To see why, let's take a close look at the stack during the sequence. When you activate Cremation Ritual, you sacrifice the Caretaker drone as a part of the process of activating that card. That activation goes onto the stack. Since you sacrifice the drone, its on death will trigger. This trigger will go onto the stack on top of the Cremation Ritual activation, and so will resolve first. How about this? You activate a card or Synthetic Reaper to sacrifice a Caretaker drone with class bonus. Do you draw the card first, or do you glimpse first? Answer: this time you'll draw a card, then glimpse for it. Despite its similarities to the previous example, this situation differs in a key way. Sacrificing an ally in this case is part of the resolution of Carter's on-enter trigger, rather than the cost of an activation. Let's take a close look at the stack in the sequence. When Carter enters the field, its on-enter will trigger. Upon the resolution of this trigger, you have the option of sacrificing an automaton ally to draw a card. All of this happens during the resolution of this trigger. After this trigger has finished resolving, Caretaker drone's on death will go onto the stack, along with Carter's trigger to recover 1. This is a bit of a tricky pair of examples, but it is my hope that this video will help you understand these kinds of scenarios and be able to deal with these types of things when they come up in your games. As evident in the previous example, one of the things a player must do when playing a card is to declare and pay costs. You'll be familiar with the reserve cost listed in the top left, but some cards like Cremation Ritual will have additional costs that are listed in the body of the card. As an aside, I'll be talking mostly about activations today, but all of this applies to materializations also, with differences as appropriate, such as having memory costs instead of reserve costs. Anyway, additional costs must be paid upon playing the card. If you cannot pay all the additional costs, you cannot play the card, in the same way that you couldn't play a card if you couldn't pay its reserve cost. This is also where you determine any X costs. For example, the value of X for Lost in Thought is chosen as it is activated. Activations can also be ability activations. These can be identified by looking for a colon on the card. The costs of the ability are listed on the left side of the colon, while effects are on the right. For example, the cost of using this Grand Crusader's ring is to banish it. The cost of using the ability of Endura Scepter of Ignition is to rest it and pay an Enlighten counter, and the rest of using the ability of Bloom Summer's Glow is to pay 2 reserve and discard it. All activated abilities are fast speed unless otherwise stated, such as on Endura. Just like for card activations, the cost of an activated ability are all paid when it is put onto the stack. All the text after the colon is part of the ability's effect, which happens when that ability resolves and leaves the stack. However, there are some abilities that use a colon on card text that are not activated abilities, such as on enter, on attack, on hit, etc., as well as other keywords such as class bonus and inherited effect. Be warned that this text does not denote an activated ability, even though they look similar in the text of cards. Besides declaring costs, players must also declare targets of activations and materializations if there are any. With a few exceptions such as links, all cards that target will use the word target in the card text. These targets must be declared and locked in on activation, which means that both players will know in advance of it resolving what the target or targets are. Some activations have mandatory targets such as Raise the Land or Scatter Essence, and cannot be activated without a legal target. Some activations use the wording up to n targets, or any amount of targets. Note that since 0 is less than 1, having 0 target is a valid choice for these activations, and they can be activated without having to declare any targets. So, unlike these previous cards, Into the Fray and Sage Protection may be activated without any allies in play. Some activations don't use the word target at all. You might notice the complete absence of the word target in the text of these cards. In these cases, the target is not declared upon activation. Rather, the affected entities are chosen upon resolution. As a consequence of this, players do not have opportunity between these choices being made and the effect resolving, and thus these choices cannot be responded to after they are made known. For example, the units dealt damage during the resolution of both the activation and the triggered ability of Lightweaver's Assault are not chosen until either of those effects begins to resolve from the stack. Lastly, some activations are modal, that is, they have different choices called modes. If an activation has modes, the choice of mode or modes is declared upon activation. This is important since the choice of mode often affects whether or not it targets. For example, one mode of this card, Cell Forging, has a target while the other does not. If a card asks for a choice to be made that's not a mode, it would be chosen on resolution. For example, this Extricating Touch simply targets a player, and the choice of which zone to reveal is not chosen until resolution and cannot be responded to once it has begun to resolve. Likewise, for Annihilation, this choice of how much damage to be dealt is determined on resolution. Remember that when an effect on the stack begins to resolve, all of its effects will take place until it is finished resolving in its entirety, with no opportunity given to either player until it's completely finished. If any of the effects are unable to be performed for whatever reason, it will do as much as able. So, although activations are restricted by needing to be legal, there is no restriction on ensuring that any of the effects of resolution have to actually happen. Extricating Touch can try to discard from a zone with no cards in it, and Annihilation doesn't have to deal damage or even destroy anything. As another example, it is perfectly allowed for you to activate and prepare Exploit Vulnerability, even if you control no assassin units, or even if you can't draw a card. So what would completely prevent effects from resolving at all? If an activation is negated, all of its effects will not happen. If an activation has any targets and any of them become invalid for any reason when it tries to resolve, all of its effects will not happen. This is called fizzling. There is, however, an exception to this. As I mentioned before, some activations have the wording up to n targets or any number of targets. This special wording makes it so that these activations will not fizzle, even if any of their targets become invalid. For example, if the target of Sharpening Stone's ability becomes invalid, its control will still draw a card. However, if the target of Smoke Bombs becomes invalid, the entire ability will fizzle and its control will not draw a card. There is one more important exception to know, and that is reflexive triggers. Some activations cause another trigger to happen under certain conditions, usually noted by when you do or something similar in the text of the card. When the specified condition is met, it generates another item on the stack called a reflexive trigger. Since this is a separate item on the stack, it can be responded to separately. For example, Parcenet, Royal Maid, has an activated ability with a reflexive trigger. Her ability is to glimpse one and reveal the top card of your deck. If the condition of revealing a wind card is met, the reflexive trigger will target another wind ally. Note that Parcenet's activated ability itself does not target. The target is only declared when the subsequent reflexive trigger goes onto the stack. Okay, that was a lot of information, so let's do a quick recap. When materializing a card, activating a card, or activating an ability, the player must do the following things: determine costs and how to pay them, declare any modes, and declare any targets. These choices will be made upon activation and locked in before each player gets opportunity to respond. Its other effects will happen on resolution. A target becoming invalid will fizzle the activation, unless it is worded as up to n targets or any number of targets. Also, watch out for when in the effects text that indicates a reflexive trigger. For the rest of this video, we'll go through a bunch of examples. I encourage the viewer to try to answer these, but don't feel bad at all for getting any of them wrong. They're intended to be illustrative examples. Question: opponent activates Blazing Throw, intending to sacrifice their only weapon. Can you remove the weapon in response? Answer: no, the weapon is sacrificed as part of the activation of Blazing Throw, and your only windows of opportunity are before the activation is attempted, and after Blazing Throw is on the stack, at which point the weapon is already gone from the field. If you suspected your opponent wanted to play Blazing Throw, you could remove the weapon before their main phase, but once Blazing Throw is activated, it's too late to do anything about the weapon. Question: you control an immortal Arthur young heir as your only ally and attempt to activate Cremation Ritual. What happens? Answer: Arthur cannot be sacrificed, and so the activation is illegal. The game state is rewound to before attempting to activate it. Note that an illegal activation is different from fizzling. An illegal action can't be made at all, while a fizzled activation will have no effects. Question: your opponent activates Embersong with class bonus, targeting 2 damage to your Novice Healer, and targeting their Imperious Highlander with +2 power. What happens if Novice Healer gets removed in response? What if Imperious Highlander gets removed in response? Answer: if the target of the 2 damage becomes an invalid target, the rest of the card's effects will still resolve and give +2 power. If the target of the +2 power becomes invalid, the entire activation will fizzle and damage will not be dealt. This is because the target for damage uses the up to wording, while the target for the power bonus is mandatory. Question: you activate Kindling Flare. What do you have to do upon activation? Answer: pay costs, including reserve and sacrificing herbs, and choose targets. Note that this activation has a special wording which prevents it from being fizzled if it loses any of its targets. Question: you activate Burst Asunder. What do you have to do upon activation? Answer: pay reserve costs and choose a target. That's it. Choosing which fractals or how many fractals to sacrifice is done upon resolution and cannot be responded to once the resolution has begun. Question. You activate Swooping Talons with a level 2 champion, attempting to destroy a Lava Plume Fate Stone. In response, its controller transforms it. Can you deal 2 damage to the Firebird Trailblazer it transforms into? Answer. You cannot. The mode of Sweeping Talons was locked in when you activate it, and after the Fate Stone transforms, the target of that mode of Sweeping Talons is no longer valid when it tries to resolve. If it was an activation that wasn't modal, it could still resolve if the target was still valid. Question. Opponent controls Portside Pirate with a floating memory card in the graveyard. They activate the pirate. Can you banish the floating memory in response with an effect like Spectral Beacon? Answer. You cannot attempt to banish the floating memory after the ability has been activated, since the floating memory was banished as a cost and is no longer in the graveyard. If instead you tried to banish it beforehand, they can activate the ability in response. Question. You sacrifice 3 Phrasia to brew a Serum of Wisdom. How much do you recover? Answer. 0. Sacrificing a Phrasia to pay the brew cost does not let you recover from sacrificing the Phrasia. Using the Phrasia's own ability requires you to sacrifice it as a cost, so you can't do both that and sacrifice it to pay for something else, such as for brewing. Note that abilities that trigger off herbs being sacrificed, such as Polaris or Foretold Bloom, will still trigger since they don't sacrifice herbs as a cost. They trigger when they see herbs being sacrificed. Question. You control a Fractal of Polar Depths. You activate it targeting yourself. How many cards do you mill? You have 0 cards in your graveyard, and assume all cards in your main deck are water element. Answer. When the activate ability goes onto the stack, Fractal of Polar Depths is already in your graveyard, so the ability will see that there is 1 water card and mill 1 card. Question. What if you had 2 Fractal of Polar Depths and activated them both? Answer. After sacrificing both Fractals, they each go to your graveyard as their activated abilities go onto the stack. When the topmost ability goes to resolve, it will see that there are already 2 water cards in your graveyard and mill 2. When the lower ability goes to resolve, it will see that there are already 4 cards in your graveyard and mill 4 more, for 8 in total. Question. Your opponent's champion is at 15 out of 19 damage. You activate Cinder Geyser, targeting their champion. They respond with Innervate Agility. You respond with another Cinder Geyser. What happens? Do they lose? Answer. Innervate Agility has a very unusual additional cost. Both the Recover 5 and D level happen as it is activated and cannot be responded to, so they will immediately go to 10 damage counters upon activation. Note that this means that Innervate cannot be activated if the control's champion has less than 5 damage counters. The topmost Cinder Geyser resolves, dealing 4 damage. Then, when Innervate Agility resolves, the only effect is that his controller chooses whether to gain Stealth or Spell Shroud. I think that's enough questions for today, so that's all for this video. Thanks for watching.